You already brought up Lloyd Weaver. Is there anything else, briefly that anyone wants to mention about Lloyd or his contributions?
I think that his invention of the air mover was probably I think the most significant, by far, the most significant, invention. It was a brilliant idea. It was simple. And
unfortunately, there may be some of you that miss the importance or the significance of what is going on here. So this is the DYOJO Podcast. I guess I'm now a geriatric millennial. Oh, yeah! Depending on where the time shift is, I'm a millennial, whatever the hell that means. Shoo-be-doo-be-doo-woo. But if you're watching this and you're struggling to deal with millennials, understand millennials, and the upcoming generations, good friends of ours at the Insurance Nerds.
A nerd alert!
Tony Canis and Carly Burnham wrote a great book, Insuring Tomorrow. It taught me a lot. But anyways, sidetrack. Squirrel. Squirrel. But what is going on here is we have some of the historic pieces from restoration as it unfolded. I think most of you will be aware, a lot of water damage came out of carpet cleaners saying, okay, we have not just wet carpets, but wet walls, Shh, just stop. I think we have a picture here of history in motion. Carpet's wet. So are the walls. Good point. What are you going to do? Let's turn this mover around. That was beautiful. Some of my favorite podcasts, they say, while we don't have access to the actual dialogue from history, based on our research, this is our best attempt to record and convey the historical dialogue. You're welcome.
No, you are so dumb.
And we talk about that a bit in this session, which is about Lloyd Weaver, the inventor of the Porta Dryer from North Dakota, of all places. Wow. Newsflash, again, the host of this podcast is mediocre at best and dumb.
You are really dumb.
There's really no other way to say it.
For real.
So he's going to read this article which references where Lloyd Weaver is actually from, and that says, Rapid City, South Dakota. Idiot! Reference material for this comes from Pete Consigli, the restoration watchdog, now the OG intentional restorer, so dubbed. March of 2017, it's volume 44, number 3 of Cleaning and Restoration, when Restoration Industry Association had a monthly printed publication. The article was called, the theme of the magazine was the Founding Fathers of Restoration, which is a lot of times what the article is called, but the article was actually titled "The Four Faces on Mount Restoration," going off of Mount Rushmore. So, taking the best of the past to build for the future. Pete wrote that article. I referenced it in our a history of advocacy, a future of collaboration, or history. Whatever. I mean, no one reads my stuff anyways. My snuff. My snuff. But, so Pete, brilliant writer. Pete has... If you think your name's on the list, nope. Marty King, which we will be talking about. You can, if you're just jonesing, you can go back and watch episode 60 of the DYOJO Podcast for what we talk about Martin King. Most of you might be familiar with the RAA, the Certified Restorer, the CR Restorer designation. That was started by Marty King. So he's number 1. Who the hell put Marty King before me? Lloyd Weaver is number 2. That is the topic of our discussion in this particular this clip from the DYOJO Podcast 60. Don't worry, with all your contributions, you're sure to be number 3, right? They're about to say your name. Cliff Zlotnik, whom you just heard, the Z-Man. You can also hear him. Please listen. I mean, this is like junior high at best when it comes to diving into the depth of issues around our industry. IAQ Radio is like a collegiate course. They do a great job of bringing people that know their stuff, if you catch my drift.
Give me 10, Norton. Everyone can eat shit. A big bag of shit.
That's every Friday, IAQ Radio. Clip the Z Man is whom you just heard. He's also on there. All of you listening in podcast land that have made such big contributions. Here, they're surely going to read your name now. Pete will read your name. You're number 4, right? You're number 4 on the Mount Restoration. Surely it's you. And closer to the end of the clip, we'll do a recap. I believe it was episode 47. Claude Blackburn.
Oh! Damn you, Roger!
Founder of Dry Ease. So, and Claude shares a funny story about his interactions with Lloyd Weaver. So, talking about Lloyd Weaver, Pete says in the Founding Fathers article, a flood in his hometown of Rapid City, South Dakota brought Lloyd into the on-location drying and Porta Dryer business in the first place. While doing pro bono work for the community, he recognized the need to streamline the process of restoring floor coverings and drying structural materials for homeowners who were on a limited budget. Lloyd was a pre-IICRC, WRT, or ASD instructor who did not have any competition because he was the original. Students came to hear what Lloyd had to say and sell, and he had one particular student, Founding Father number 4, Claude Blackburn, who took his ideas not just to the next level, but to the next stratosphere. His influence and vision are what placed Lloyd Weaver as the second face on Mount Restoration. So I encourage you to read that article. Encourage you to, Pete's a regular guest. He's the watchdog, so he comes on, much like he did for this episode, to kind of make sure that our facts are correct. It's funny, man, because if you start digging into history, a lot of people, if the people you're talking to aren't saying, have you talked to Pete Consigli, you might be talking to the wrong people. Again, the DYOJO Podcast, this is our goal is to help you shorten your dang learning curve. It's your learning curve. You need to learn it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It's very good if you can learn from others and shorten your learning curve. Run into less brick walls. Democratize the information, as it were. But at the end of the day, you have to take the information you're receiving and the sources you're receiving it from and test that against what you know and decide whether that's right or not. And so this is a fun little drift back in time to...
You and I have witnessed many things, but nothing as bodacious as what just happened.
Talk about a historical figure that unfortunately is no longer with us, but the guests on our podcast had direct interaction with him and some fun stories to share. So the DYOJO Podcast, helping you shorten your dang learning curve for personal and professional development. The podcast for the skilled trades.
What's even crazier, John, is that, this idea to put it underneath the carpet and float the carpet. And, the amazing thing is, I went to a school, it was a one-day school. He told me how to do it. He told me, it would take 1 or 2 air movers in a room and one of these 32-pint dehumidifiers or whatever. And, it would take 2-3 days to dry, 4 days, whatever, and had a little moisture sensor with a beeper on it. And I would kind of know when it was dry. But the amazing thing, and I didn't realize this, between 1975 and 2001, what happens to that air? And it all goes back to the smoke that I told you about before, when the air mover picks up the smoke. And in that article that we published, there are photographs of what happens. And the amazing thing is, one air mover in the right place will do what 10 movers in the wrong place won't do. Okay. And the amazing thing, the thing that irritates me the most is when I've shown this to people, they nod and say, oh, isn't that interesting, or whatever. They don't really change and they don't really get it. But the amazing thing is once you have the ability to see where the air moves, because the air is invisible, you're blowing all this air around, but once you can see where it moves, it gives a whole new idea, I think, of drawing. And, it's pretty amazing.
To a seminar from Lloyd Weaver, saw his Porta Dryer. I think it was when Lloyd came out to the Northwest, right? He's definitely somebody that pops up in history. Do you remember much about the seminar and Lloyd's process?
Not very much. I mean, Lloyd, I could relate to Lloyd because he's blue collar.
Yeah.
He was just your average Joe. He was rough around the edges. He was rough all the way through. And he charged. And I've been going to a lot of seminars because I didn't have much education. I'd sign up for these $59. At that time, there was a dozen companies where you could go to these one-day seminars on every subject you could imagine. So I took those all in, $59. So I'm going, and so I took all those seminars, and Lloyd was charging $250. Wow. Back in 1975 or something, 4 or 5 in that range. And I went to a seminar. It was basically just stood up there and talked to everybody. And he made jokes. He was a down-to-earth kind of guy. And I bought a couple of air movers from him and a sensor. I think he had a sensor at that time. And I started doing water damage restoration. And
so now the carpet cleaning business adapts into water damage. Did John or Ken, did either of you have interactions with Lloyd?
Not me. I knew who he was. The name Lloyd Weaver was, synonymous with the drying industry as it emerged in the early 70s.
As it relates to Lloyd, it's kind of I would describe it as it's a shame comment, because Lloyd is as innovative as he was and as creative as he was, really never in any significant way capitalized on his ingenuity. He wasn't such a great business person, and honestly, and we'll talk about him a little later, Claude Blackburn took a lot of Lloyd's ideas and created an incredibly successful business from it. So, as I said, there's a little bit of that. Lloyd passed away, what was it, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. Maybe it was longer. But I had a conversation with his son, Lance, at around that time. And, Lance was a little bit like his dad, but involved in, they're very big on what they call dust down. But it has not had the same impact on the industry as Lloyd's original ideas, and which were based on, as I understand it, a huge flood. He was out of Rapid City, South Dakota, and they had a huge flood, and basically he outthought the damage and figured out ways to make it work.
Big event. I remember we hired Jeff Bishop to come in and talk, and I remember my booth was next to Lloyd Weaver. And what would happen is, people would walk down this hallway and, the aisles of the exhibit hall, and Lloyd's booth was next to me, and he had this little carpet dryer on the floor. He had 3 different sizes. He had a small one that was used for drying closets. He had a medium one, and, he had a big one, but he had a small one on the floor. And in my booth, I had this little electric thermal fogger. And, people would come down in order to attract attention. I'd push the button and it would, pump out the smoke. And after doing it a couple of times, Lloyd and I became fascinated by watching the air mover draw in the smoke through the intake and then
distribute it.
to distribute it out. And it was, we got to talking, and, when we left, he had my equipment and I had his equipment. We did a trade where I bought his and he bought mine. And, whatever financial differences was, made up, financially. And that was the first time we ever met. And that's how, we formed a long time relationship together.
That's
what I remember.
All right, let's commercial break. Here we go. David Princeton. I'm calling David Princeton, Advocate Claim Service, ACS for short.
Advocate Claim Service.
Now, regarding Lloyd, I knew Lloyd pretty well, not as good as Cliff, but I knew him well. And I don't totally agree with Mr. Downey's assessment. Granted, and I wrote this in the Founders article, Claude took the idea and he turned it into the global industry. But shortly after that little dispute, and actually Cliff intervened, but Claude told me, and I don't know if he said this on the show, Lloyd was so mad apparently they were on a roof when they had this discussion, and he had to intervene because I think, well, I from the top of the roof to the bottom of the parking lot, it's not a good place to be. So anyway, thank you for that, Cliff, and on behalf of the Blackburn family, I'll thank you for that. But what Lloyd did after that was a very innovative thing when he started with the dust downs. The whole dust down process was really the beginning of what a lot of early mold remediators did in the 90s in order to get clearance, right? But he did this really, that was the beginning of the indoor air quality industry in the 90s, which was another rabble-rousing industry. He never really gets the credit in the early days of IOQ that Lloyd contributed to that, but he contributed a lot, okay? And his son, Lance, he had several sons, but his son, Lance, was a professional engineer, and they opened up the whole robotics industry. They operate in 52 countries, and he has patents all over the place on all those little robots that go into the ductwork and to do all that stuff. And that's all really, really important part of that.
I mean, I could tell you a few stories about Lloyd because once I got into the business, he was very aggressive. I mean, one time he was going to beat me up.
Well, you eventually became his competition, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean, a few years later, but really, I bought a couple of pieces of equipment, went to a seminar, and I never had any dealings with Lloyd after that. I mean, he wasn't like a mentor or a person I talked with, I mean, I would see him at the trade shows because I was attending the Carpet Cleaners Institute of the Northwest at that time. Yeah. I'd see him around, but I never was really, he wasn't my buddy or anything.
So you guys ever put the boxing gloves on and do that at an industry show?
Yeah, well, in Vancouver, Washington, we had a Carpet Cleaners Institute meeting up there. In those days, those were pretty serious. I mean, we might have, 100, 150 companies come to something like that. We'd have big exhibits. For me as a greenhorn, it was a huge thing, and but I had brought out my first air movers. So that was, and he came over to me. He was so pissed. So he had a bit of a temper. He was so pissed. He says, "You copied my color." And I'm going, "Copied your color? What? You got it?" And he grabs me by starts shaking me like I'm kind of a nonviolent person. And it was a good thing he did because it made me mad is what it did. It made me embarrassed. It was in front of everybody, and I didn't copy his color intentionally. I just they only had 8 colors of Imron paint. And I was using a super quality 2-part paint back in those days. It was the most expensive paint that money could buy. And my metal, I was making metal dryers.
Yep.
And so they only had 8 colors. They had a light blue and a dark blue. I picked one of them. But anyway, he made me mad enough, and I was young enough. That was a mistake on his part because I was going to get even. I was going to show him what's what, and of course, I would have never been able to show him what's what with a metal air mover. I made 10 units the first year, and I'd been selling easy blocks since the late 70s out of my garage. And then you say, well, what else can I do? I mean, somebody's going to know. I got to have something else. And I wrote the Carpet Cleaner's Guide to Water Damage Restoration, which I actually have a revised version, but this is the first book.
I hope there's a few of you that are as excited as I am about, what we've been able to unearth. So we started, this was a conversation, DYOJO Podcast, episode 60 was about history and people. It was a panel discussion, history, people, and the parallel lines with the development of the standards. And so We tried to get through a marathon 2-hour episode.
It's over, Johnny. It's over! Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Thanks to Cliff Zlotnik, Ken Larsen, John Downey, and Pete Consigli, with a guest snippet from Ed Cross 2. You know, he's talking about, as it relates to the standards, what not to have in your contracts.
Comply with the standard of care, but do not write into your contract that you're going to perform the work according to IICRC standards. Don't put that in your contracts. It's not going to help you sell any jobs. It's going to marry you to these thick documents. They're hundreds of pages long, and all the plaintiff's attorney has to do is point to one sentence in there that you didn't strictly comply with, and they'll be able to shout about, breach of contract in addition to the negligence claim. You don't need that kind of headache. Do not have the IICRC initials in your contract.
As you should be aware, he has been for many years the restoration lawyer, now the restoration advocate, as part of the Restoration Industry Association, RIA, AGA committee, the Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee, which they're rolling out in addition to the position papers and all those things that they've rolled out for members and the conversations they've been having. They're now doing the AGA Academy to help train on how to use those, which some people have brought up. So that's been, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and sometimes it's so behind the scenes that we don't always hear about it until it's developed. And
I kept the secret so good. You didn't know, you didn't know, you didn't freaking know, but I knew.
He knew.
Yes, we did it.
You did it.
So I think they certainly could do a much better job of communicating as the things develop and those kinds of things. But definitely resources worth checking out, available to members. So make your own decision on that. Hoping to see some of y'all down in Florida for the RAA convention. This will be my first in many, many years. Again, dig into history, reach out, connect, collaborate, conquer. Hopefully this is a vehicle to help you do that in snippets. Snippets. So listen to the whole podcast, listen to none of the podcasts, read the books, don't read the books. Do whatever the heck you want. See you next time. The DYOJO Podcast, helping you shorten your dang learning curve for personal and professional development. Check it out, thedyojo.com, DYOJO.com. Every day is a struggle, but quit direction. You can give up or you can get lifted.
This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
To help train on how to use those.
This guy ever shut up?
There's a lot of work
Shut
that goes
up,
on
dude.
behind the
No
scenes,
one
and sometimes
cares.
it's so behind the scenes
No one cares, bro.